This is the Project Management Podcast. We bring project management topics to beginners and experts. Find us on the web at www.thepmpodcast.com or send your emails to pmpodcast@gmail.com.
Hello and welcome to this premium episode number 120. I am Cornelius Fichtner. This is the Project Management Podcast for the 7th of June 2009. Nice to have you with us. This episode of the podcast is a premium episode, recorded especially for you, the subscribers of the Premium Project Management Podcast, and thank you so much for supporting my efforts to improve project management and by subscribing to my Premium Prepcast. There is one platitude that you hear again and again about projects. Projects, so the saying goes, help us to turn the strategic goals of an organization into reality. This is the statement that lies at the center of today's discussion with Jennifer Russell. She is from Mastodon Consulting, and you have heard her last week talk about sustainability. But one of Jennifer's strengths is strategic thinking. And then she is also able to help companies execute that strategy. That is an ability for which I have always admired her. So let's hear what she has to say about how to turn strategy into projects, about the balanced scorecard, about portfolio management, and a number of other issues regarding turning strategy into successful projects. Enjoy the interview. Hello, Jennifer, and welcome back to the program.
Hi, Cornelius. Great to be here.
One platitude that gets thrown around way too often in project management is that projects help us to turn strategic goals into reality. How do you feel about that statement?
I think, it's funny because it has gotten to the point of cliche, but I do think that it's really critical because I read a lot of like Harvard Business Review articles and that sort of thing, and they always talk about like the mystery of how you get to execution, and I always want to throw these across the table and say, dude, it's not a mystery. It's called project and portfolio management. Figure out what your projects are in terms of what your strategy is going to be. So it's not that hard, but it's hard to everybody but project managers. But we need to kind of get that communication going.
So what is then the process to make it actually work?
That's actually a little bit more challenging, and I think part of
I thought so.
I think part of the problem is a lot of companies just don't do strategy well. So a lot of what some companies call strategy is really nothing other than operational effectiveness. Now, operational effectiveness sounds like one of those words that puts you to sleep, but really all it means is doing the same thing the other guy's doing, just doing it better. So what I always think of is, I think of a gas station, and I can tell that these two gas stations that are across the street from each other think that they're selling the same product. Why? Because they're competing on price. The first thing that you see when you drive down the street is it says, $2.39 a gallon, and the other guy says $2.41 a gallon, And really, there's very little differentiation. The product is kind of the same. So I've worked for some companies that say that, their strategy is to produce their product a little bit faster and sell it a little bit cheaper than the other guy. Well, that's not really a strategy. It's not really giving you any room to differentiate yourself from the competition. What you want to create is a situation where you're in a market alone. You're creating a different set of activities from your rivals, creating a different position in the market. So if you think about, if I think about computer manufacturers, well, Apple has definitely created a unique position, around they have better design, they have, a better user experience, so they can charge a lot more. So that's kind of a smart thing to do in terms of strategy. And a lot of it is you've got to do a lot of different activities that fit together in order to do something different. So one of my One of the companies that I really like, they're, for eons, if I went into the grocery store and I wanted to get a container of dish soap, well, I would walk down this aisle and I would see all this dish soap that all looked pretty much exactly the same. They were all in the same packaging. One was green, one was blue. They all had names that were like Dawn and Joy. And frankly, they were all made by Procter & Gamble. It was all the exact same company. And they were all $1.43. And so everybody knew that there was no room for any competitor in this market. Well, Method, a small San Francisco firm, said, I think we could do something different. And they came up with an environmentally sound product that had really cool packaging that you wouldn't feel like you'd have to hide under the counter as soon as your neighbors walked over. And they were able to charge significantly more for that. So that's kind of the point of strategy, is you need to be doing something different than what your competitors are doing in order to actually have a strategic advantage. So that's kind of it's kind of a little tangential because it's not really talking about project management too much, but it's important to understand, because if your organization doesn't have a really good strategy, it's really hard to align project management to those ideas in order to actually execute something well.
Okay, then, so why should we even bother to align our projects to the corporate strategy?
Well, if you think about how projects should fit into the organization, strategic alignment makes an awful lot of sense. So what I tend to think about is, project management is so much like the scientific method. Now, that sounds kind of weird, but when I think about how a kid in grade school learns the scientific method and learns the basics of science, he comes up with a theory, and then he says, okay, well, I'm going to conduct some experiments to prove or disprove my theory. And he conducts the experiments, and he looks at the data, and he says, wow, okay, well, that theory was garbage. This experiment didn't work. So, obviously my theory was wrong. Or he conducts his experiment and says, wow, that's cool. I just blew up the kitchen table. That's awesome. And then he's learned something from that as well. And in the same way, strategic execution is all about figuring out which projects are going to help you execute your strategic theories. So, I might think, okay, if I introduce a new product, I bet I'm going to get a whole bunch of new customers, just a new class of customers that we're not even serving right now. So I initiate a project. I get a project manager and say, hey, we're going to do this product launch of this new product. And so the project manager goes and he executes this project. And you know what project management is? Project management is like the scientific rigor. It's how you know that the project was conducted correctly. So he does this project and he gets it done on time and on budget. And then at the end of the project, he can look at it along with his executive and say, wow, okay, so it's done. So what's the data? We wanted to find out if this launch would get us new customers. Did it work? And at the end of it, we look and say, wow, okay, actually, it looks like we cannibalized all of our old customers, and we didn't get any new customers at all. Okay, so this strategy, this theory failed. This is a bad strategy. Let's throw it away. We got to go come up with a new plan, a new way to differentiate ourselves. Or, wow, this project, was not only done on time and on budget, but it was also achieved our objective, and we were able to get new customers from this product launch. Yay! So we validated our strategy with this project. So now that we have this data and we've looked at it and we figure out that it works, well, maybe we should execute more projects and do more product launches or whatever, just kind of validating that strategy. So it's a lot of theories and testing that theory through projects and then, moving forward. The bad thing is in a lot of companies, as we get siloed and so on and so forth, sometimes we get projects approved, and by the time the project gets approved, nobody can remember why it was that we did it, what the strategic objective was. So it really helps when you're starting out on a project to get that information and try and understand before like 6 months from now when you actually deliver and nobody remembers why you did it, so that you can measure, not just I got it done on time and on budget, but also, wow, what was the objective that we were trying to achieve? Did it meet that objective? Kind of measuring it from a completely different level. And that makes your project a little bit more valuable and kind of improves your own visibility within the firm as well.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about balanced scorecard going forward here, because many companies use the balanced scorecard to do exactly what you've described, measure, whether it be on a corporate level or on a project by project level, how the projects are doing. So let's look at the basics here. It's called balanced scorecard. Why is it balanced? and what is the score that we're keeping on this card?
Understood. Well, when we think about how companies normally keep score of their success, it tends to be, financial results. My quarterly results were this, my annual results were this. They're very easy to measure. They're, what the markets want. But the purpose of a balanced scorecard was realizing, well, hey, if we're always looking backward, if we're always looking back to the last quarter and the last year, then we're going to create a situation where, at the end of every quarter or at the end of every month, everybody's like scrambling to get as many sales as they can. And then, it's going to get us in trouble the beginning of the next month. But who cares? We just got to get this done, and it's not thinking in the long term. It's not really making sure that what the organization is doing is actually going to work from quarter to quarter, because I'm always looking backwards. So, like if you think about a kid in first grade and she gets a report card, well, you wouldn't want her to get to the end of the year and then the teacher calls mom in and says, "Oh, by the way, Amy failed for the year." We have records because Amy's mom needs to know that, she's not doing well in reading, so maybe I can help her with that. And she's doing well in math. You want reports along the way. So the purpose of a balanced scorecard is to try to look at all the elements that are going to be in play in terms of the company's success in the long term. So we want to balance financial results with all the things that help us get to financial results. So what I mean by that is I know that, my company has particular drivers that make it successful. I have to make my customers happy. I have to do some things incredibly well, whether it's manufacturing processes or buying and selling, whatever processes are important to the development of my company. And I've got to make sure that my employees are growing and learning things. So in that sense, those are kind of the different concepts that kind of compose a balanced scorecard. So the thought is, if I look at different areas within the firm and I can say, okay, well, if I do certain things to make sure that my employees are smarter, that they're going to be able to develop better processes, which is going to make our customers happy, which is going to make our financial results better. So you have to break down your business into different components and have strategies around all of those different areas in order to be able to make sure that your business continues to thrive over time.
Mm-hmm. Can you take that down to the project level and show us how such a balanced scorecard would work on a project? What kind of things you put on it?
Sure. Always good to make it practical. So I might think that, okay, if I develop leadership skills within my employees, that will help us come up with better market segmentation, which will allow us to offer more products to consumers, which will strengthen our cash flow. So that's kind of like the path that something follows. So in each of those areas, I may have projects like I want to offer more products for consumers. Okay, well, that's part of making our customers more satisfied. So every single one of those strategies in all those different areas is going to need to have projects behind them and target measurements for them in order to meet those objectives. So if my strategy is to offer more products for consumers, well, I'm going to have, maybe 10 different projects in a portfolio that are all working towards that initial goal. If one of my objectives is to reduce time to market, well, I may have a couple projects there as well. And it always makes a lot of sense to understand the overall strategic objective that is guiding those projects in order to be able to speak to the executives about, I think we're going off the rails. I don't think that we're doing as well as we could, where we've started offering more products, and I don't think it's having the results that we anticipated. Maybe we want to revisit this.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the portfolio management focus here. When we talk about balanced scorecard on projects, I assume this is not something that every project manager would reinvent for his or her project, but this is something that comes from a higher level down, from a PMO or from a portfolio management office area. And we as project managers are then simply the providers of the data. This is what our project looks like, and they will do the analysis. Do I see this right somehow?
Well, yes and no, because it actually operates at two levels. First of all, the portfolio management is critical because balanced scorecard can't really be implemented without good portfolio management. Mm-hmm. But good portfolio management can't be implemented without good project management. So with portfolio management, when we use our goals from Balanced Scorecard as the basis for determining which projects are selected and given priority, the end result is only those projects that move towards those long-term goals are going to be undertaken. And it's always a nightmare in portfolio management because there's always some executive that comes up and says, well, I've always wanted to have some project that, would kind of give my dog a shiny coat. They always have some pet project that has absolutely nothing to do with the organization's strategy. And having the data to say, this is our strategic plan. Can you explain how this fits in? I mean, you're not always going to win those battles, but ideally, you want to have criteria that you measure the projects against that say, is this in or out? Does this match our strategy, or is this taking us completely in a different direction? Is this not going to work? So from a portfolio management perspective, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of figuring out which projects to include. And when I look at my strategy, when I look at my organization strategy, I might see a strategic objective. Whether it's for example, creating a developer network. But then there's no projects that back that up, and so I can raise my hand and say, hey. If we don't have a project for this, guess what? We're never going to meet the strategic objectives. So should we be adding a project here, and how do we prioritize it, and that sort of thing? So in terms of portfolio management, they clearly have a critical role. But also, project managers also get a lot of benefits with being linked to Balanced Scorecard, being linked to the strategy, because you are more directly linking strategy with execution. So when you're more closely tied with strategy, if you understand the strategic objectives that your project is being undertaken to achieve, it's going to be able to help you make decisions with scope control and change management, because when somebody says, hey, I want to change to your project, you can look back at the strategy and say, is this going to get us closer to what we're trying to achieve, or is this going to get us farther away? And you can, decide from there whether it's going to be a good idea or not. And Perfect. You're taking this exactly in the direction I wanted to go. So,
no, serious. Because here's my question: how I would like to close this out. Right? You've now taken it from the portfolio down to the project management level, right? Uh-huh. And this project manager that you've just talked about, he or she has a balanced scorecard available to them, right? And they can go through and they can begin to figure out this information and put it in and get the data out. But what do you do if you are working in a company where there is no balanced scorecard, right? Because many companies, like we talked about in our last interview, we talked about the fact that probably many of the larger companies out there, they have sustainability policies, but the smaller ones won't. And most of us project managers, we work for smaller companies. Probably same thing here, right? Large companies, very likely to have some kind of a process, but the small ones may not. So let's take this on to the small company, right? Let's close it out with that. And let's discuss what a project manager can do who works for a small company and who would like to have a little bit more strategic alignment for his or her projects, but hey, we don't have a balanced scorecard. What can I do now?
That's a really important question. It's kind of funny because I spoke a little bit earlier on about companies that say that they have a strategy, but their strategy is really like just to be a little bit better than the next guy, and that's obviously not going to work. What I did in the case where I was working for that company was, I found an article in Harvard Business Review. Michael Porter writes some really good articles on this topic if you're having this problem. And I found an article that was, it's called What is Strategy? And it explains in detail the difference between operational effectiveness and strategy and why operational effectiveness is going to fail. And I said, hey, I thought this article was really cool. I wanted to show it to you. And I just gave it to him. And a week later, he comes back and he says that this was a financial exec at my company. He comes back and he says, I read that article you sent. And I said, yeah? And he says, I just realized something. We don't have a strategy. so it's kind of fun. It's good to be part of the discussion and try to figure out, wow, well, how can I help things within my company? Because frankly, we don't want to work for companies that are just kind of spinning their wheels. So if you have some information that would help the company in terms of like figuring out overall direction, that's great. But if your company is just kind of floundering and just trying to like make do, well, it certainly helps. Even if your company either doesn't have a published strategy or is one of those really weird companies that thinks it's important that none of their employees know what the strategy is, which I find very mysterious because how are the employees going to execute against it if they don't know what it is? Then it's good when you get a project to sit down and say, hey, I really want to do this and I want to do this to the best of my ability. And I was wondering if you can give me kind of the big story, like why did you guys decide to do this? Because I want to make sure that I understand so that I make the right decisions going forward. Who's really championing this? Why is this a good idea? And you can at least get the context and that reasoning. And if you don't do it at the very beginning when the project is first assigned, chances are people are going to forget why it was assigned. But if you have that information, then further down the line when somebody's like, why are we working on that? Let's yank that. Let's forget it. You at least have that information to say, well, okay, my understanding was Joe wanted to do this because we thought that this was going to help with our, competitive situation against, Dave's drugs down the street. So if that's not really the case anymore, then let's talk about it. So having, if you're not lucky enough to have like formal communication, you should always drive like informal communication just so you can understand and know what the context is and what the reasons for your project are.
You make it sound way too easy. But I have to admit, yes, it is easy. Simply ask what the overall strategy is. Might be a good approach if you do not have some kind of a balanced scorecard in your organization, or if your organization does not officially align its projects with the strategy. Just find out by yourself.
Yeah, well, and it can be tough because not every organization wants to have those kind of open conversations. And, they may look at you funny because nobody ever asks them this question and say, well, just do it. But it's like, but unless you ask, then there's no chance that you're going to find out. So it's, it's useful because then once you know that going into it, then you can make an argument for the value of the project a little bit better on your way out. And, you can probably tell a more compelling story on your resume should you decide to ever leave that company about what strategic objective you were able to achieve, not just delivering a project on time and on budget, but, turning things around for a troubled company. Sounds pretty good to me.
Does. Jennifer, thank you very much. Appreciate that you came back to us and that you spoke to us about from strategy to projects. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you very much, Cornelius.
And that was our interview with Jennifer Russell on how to go from strategy to projects. That's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at thepmpodcast.com. If you are a project manager who wants to become a PMP, then the easiest way to do so is with our sister podcast, the PM Prepcast, and study for the exam by watching over 100 podcast video episodes from pmprepcast.com. And if you are already a PMP, then stop by at pmlectures.com. Here we go beyond just delivering PDUs. We give you exclusive training from the brightest minds in project management today. Please send your emails to pmpodcast@gmail.com, and when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this. A red item in your status report is not like a red bottle of wine. It does not improve with age and should be acted upon immediately. Until next time.